All right, thank you guys so much. We are doing another Seeing Through Gebser video. I apologize about getting this to you a day late after I had some computer problems yesterday. Don't get me started. After about 3 hours of me verbally abusing Grok, I finally got it figured out. So after some frustration, I think it should be good for the time being. I don't think there will be any more technical difficulties. So thank you. I'm glad I was able to only delay this video by a day and not a week or two. So I guess it was good. I hope Grok dies. But besides that, we're going to have fun today. And so we're moving on to a new section. It's called The Nature of Creativity. And this little subsection is called Creativity as an Originary Phenomenon. Now, of course, originary does not mean temporal beginning. It means of origin. And we're going to talk about how creativity, true creativity, that is a product of origin. I want to give you a slight apology. This video is probably going to be a little shorter than some of the other Gebser videos. You have to remember I'm a new father. I have a newborn, and anytime there's a choice to make between doing Gebser or YouTube, and as much as I love you guys know I love you, and helping my girlfriend out or my daughter out, it's always going to be my daughter. So I appreciate it. Thank you guys for continuing to watch, and I love you. Let's get right into it. All right. So Gebser says, quote, "In creativity, origin is present." Now, this first paragraph is going to have a lot, so it's some good stuff. Creativity is not bound to space and time, and its truest effect can be found in mutation, the course of which is not continuous in time, but rather spontaneous, acausal, and discontinuous. So we're already breaking from this rational understanding of things where creativity is, I have one creative act followed by another. It's this continuous duration. No. Creative moment, creative inspiration, as he says, is spontaneous, it is acausal, and it is discontinuous. It is spontaneous in the sense that it just, boom, it arises, it appears just like that. It is acausal in the sense that it's very difficult to pin down a preceding cause on a physical level. And then discontinuous, meaning that it just appears, kind of like in tandem with that spontaneity aspect. It is discontinuous, so it just happens like that. He continues. Creativity is a visibly emerging impulse of origin which, quote-unquote, is, in turn, timeless. Oh, excuse me. Or more accurately, before or above time and timelessness. And creativity is something that happens to us, that fully affects or fulfills itself in us. So one of the key points he's making here is that when it comes to creativity, we have to drop this idea that the ego and the willing mental way of doing things is the only way of doing things. No, origin is in charge. Origin is the real mover of things. So we need to work in alignment with it and not against it. All of this makes it suspect to any and all rationalist, for creativity reveals the limitations of understanding and places every form of anthropocentrism into question. Creativity appears to be an irrational process, although it is actually irrational. It cannot be adequately circumscribed by a strictly psychological interpretation, and the theological interpretation which comes to mind is a matter for theologians, whose controversies are best avoided by outsiders. This will necessarily exclude the question of the demiurge from our discussion. Our concern is with origin and its manifestation, creativity, which to the extent that it takes place in man and is effected in the formation of consciousness. Through creativity, pre-conscious origin becomes the conscious present. Very important. Repeat for emphasis. Through creativity, pre-conscious origin becomes the conscious present. So creativity is almost a vessel or a vehicle that communicates or carries with it origin, pure, streamlined origin, not obstructed by the projections of the magic, mythical, and mental structure. It is the most direct, although rarest, process of integration, and, even when realized for only the span of fractions of a second, can never be lost. Every statement about creativity is open to doubt. My God, why am I so tired? Since creativity is a potency or energy, it cannot be grasped systematically and can at best be perceived systatically. There's an important point here. He says, since creativity is a potency or energy, so that's the best way to think about it. It is a potency or energy of an originary phenomenon, so of a spiritual nature. That is true creativity. It's a spiritual energy or potency. Since it is a potency which only rarely manifests itself in its full strength, The requisite empirical evidence for comparison is unusually limited. We must also take into account that its manifestations are mostly fragmentary and have a psychic emphasis, so that most statements about it have only limited validity. In any event, creativity is more than a creative, imaginary, intuitive, productive, or reproductive element. So all the rational understanding of what creativity is, it's more than that. It's origin. It is the spiritual whole. Its visible effectiveness is achieved where the strength of the inner constellation and the degree of intensity are equal to its potency. That is, where its demand is able to find a response. It is fulfilled in individuals to the same degree as in entire generations to the extent that they are ready for it. That is to say, you need to keep your consciousness open so that origin can work its magic through you, and then once you feel that, you can recognize it as such, rather than rationalizing it away, rather than psychologizing it away. No, it is of a spiritual nature. That is why great art is timeless. Bach, Vivaldi, Mozart, The Weather Girls, It's Raining Men by the Weather Girls. These are timeless pieces of art because they are generated or they derive from a timeless spiritual whole that is origin. All right, so let's continue. Statements on creativity are uncommonly rare, although Socrates' daimon and Plato's eros, E-R-O-S that is, may quite possibly be partial statements about it. The daimon is the force which ruptured the world of myth and the mutation that occurred during the last centuries before Christ and cleared the way for mutation of the mental, which is also expressed in the directed energy of the Platonic eros. The so-called quote-unquote libido of present-day psychoanalysis, which just means psychological energy rather than pent-up sexual energy. It's more broader. That's part of it, but it's more all-encompassing. And present-day psychoanalysis has, by contrast, only a remote connection, if any, with the original phenomenon of creativity, and is at the very most, to the extent that it is regarded as an available amount of psychic energy, or, more accurately, of psychic tension, a co-bearer or possibly participant in creativity, but not creativity as such. So now we're going to get into some cool stuff. We're going to get into some ancient Chinese stuff. Before turning to the effectuality of what can be called the creativity of the individual, to be examined in the next section, we should, for the sake of clarification, quote from the oldest known reference to this original phenomenon. It is of Chinese origin and is found in the I Ching, or Book of Changes. The statement on creativity, the Qian, forms the first chapters of mankind's oldest book of wisdom. So we're going to analyze the Book of Changes, which, as he said, is the oldest book of mankind's oldest book of wisdom. What he's going to say is that there's a mental emphasis. Once wisdom starts to be... Originally, the Book of Changes was a book of soothsaying. It's oracles. It was really telling you about the fate that is imposed on you, and there's not much you can do. It is your job to fall in line with this fate, kind of like a prophecy. And the problem is, once you start acting and asking, and he's going to talk about this, for correct conduct, that signals mental structure. That signals ego willing, that you are a co-participant in fate. So let's get into it. The origin of the I Ching, or Book of Changes, demonstrably belongs to prehistoric times. Fu Si, F-U space H-S-I, I apologize for mispronouncing the Chinese names. Did you expect otherwise? Let's be real here. Fu Si, who is held to be its first author, is a representative of the era of hunting and fishing and of the invention of cooking, unquote. These ancient activities show that the origins of the book extended back into the magic structure. For many thousands of years, it was a book of soothsayings and oracles, and was revised into a book of wisdom around 1000 BC by King Wen and his son, the Duke of Chao. So first we're going to talk about the revision and see how the statement on creativity is shaped by that revision, by the new structure. And then at the end of that, we're going to talk about the original structure, the magic structure, and the statement on creativity. Quote, they endowed the hitheromute hexagrams and lines, which formed the original oracular signs, from which the future had to be divined as an individual matter in each case, with definite counsels for correct conduct. When it happened for the first time in China that someone, on being told the auguries for the future, did not let the matter rest there, but asked, "What am I to do?" The book of divination had become a book of wisdom. So someone had essentially explained their fate to them, and they said, "Well, what am I going to do about it?" That's mental structure. That's ego. So let's talk about what a hexagram is for a second. So a hexagram is super cool. It's this I don't want to call it a game. A game feels like it's undermining it. I'm going to call it a game for lack of a better term. I hope that doesn't come off as insulting because it's not meant to be. But it's this really cool game, like I said, for lack of a better term. And what you do is you take a coin and you assign heads and tails a certain number. So let's say we assign heads 3 and tails 2. So I'm going to flip the coin. And I'm going to ask an open-ended question. So how am I going to overcome the obstacles that will face me in the future? You have to ask an open-ended question rather than on... We're not predicting future here. What we're doing in the hexagram is we're kind of pulling upon the spiritual forces, kind of existing wherever, into shaping our fate. I'll explain it later, but it has nothing to do with this crystal ball. On July 31st, I'm going to be doing this, and my mom's going to die in 3 years. It's not like that. So what you do is you ask kind of an open-ended question, like I said. You take the coin, you flip the coin, and you flip it 3 times. So, like I said, the heads is 3, tails is 2. So it could be, let's say you flip it 3 times and it's a tails. So it's 6. So you say, okay. So I have a 6, and then I look into the book of changes, and you have to have a line. So a line corresponds with the number. So the ultimate goal with the hexagram is to create a 6-figured or a 6-line configuration, and then that you will check at the very end, and then you'll have your soothsaying, you'll have your spiritual advice. So let's say one of the lines is straight, unbroken. So I just say, okay, I draw a straight line, and then that's it. So I do it again, and I get a 7 this time, or maybe a 9, and it says broken straight line. So instead of, let me actually write this down here real quick. So instead of, so we have the straight line, and then we have this little broken line here. I know it's kind of difficult to see, I apologize, but up front we have just a straight line, and then we have a broken line, right? So the hexagram. So you do that 6 times, and then eventually you will have a 6-figured configuration that is a unique pattern. And there are 64 possibilities for this configuration. Now, once you're done, and once you have your 6-figure line, you check the book of changes again, and then it will correspond to a symbol or some sort of spiritual advice. So let's say it's a well or a tree. Now, I'm going to be making stuff up after this, so don't think that this comes from the book of changes, because I've obviously never read it. But let's say it's a well, and it says something like, I don't know. Let's just make something off the top of the head. The well is water, and the well signals that, I don't know, the soul will surge forward, and when you are in a tough place, maybe your mom dies, you will have to look inward rather than external. You will fail if you look towards external success in terms of money to fill that void. You have to look internal. I'm just making shit up. So let's say I have another 6-figure configuration, and it corresponds to a tree. And we'll say, I don't know, the tree is firm, it is rooted, so when you face the obstacles in the future, that's what you must be. You must be strong, you must be stoic. And that's kind of how it works. So as you can see, instead of just passively accepting the prophecies of the future based on this oracle soothsaying ancient book, based on the magic structure, essentially, now this one guy asks, well, what am I to do about it? That signals ego willing. That's mental structure. So now we've moved on. Okay, so that was pretty cool, a hexagram. Let's get back into the quote here. Quote, thus the individual came to share in shaping fate, for his actions intervened as determining factors in world events. The more decisively so, the earlier he was able with the aid of the Book of Changes to recognize situations in their germinal phases. The germinal phase is the crux. As long as things are in their beginnings, they can be controlled. But once they have grown to their full consequences, they acquire a power so overwhelming that man stands impotent before them. Kind of reminds me of the movie Poor Things, where Willem Dafoe has his little experiment of Emma Stone, and it's in the germinal phase. So he's really trying to keep power and control because he either consciously or subconsciously realizes, hey, like, there's a potential for this outgrowing me, and now we're going to have problems. And then, of course, that's exactly what happens. Okay, now here's Gebser. We have quoted these last lines since they can suggest to a thoughtful person how important it is to recognize the inceptual or germinal situations. It is a question of such a situation today, namely of the aperspectival world and its initial manifestations. This is the beauty of Gebser. We're still in this incipient, it's in the germinal phase, the irrationality, and Gebser has given us all the tools to make the most of it and to channel it healthily. We got to do that. The revision of the former book of oracles into a book of wisdom mentioned in this connection indicates the decisive fact that around 1000 BC, man began to awaken to a diurnal, wakeful consciousness. He no longer merely accepted the world, but rather made decisions on correct conduct. He no longer merely endured fate, but became its co-agent. And in the Iliad, some 2 centuries later, the identical process was completed, evident in the praise of Menes, directing and correcting thinking, heralding the mutation from the mythical to the mental structure and leading to the triumph of cognizant, correct, and directed actions. So he says, these examples convey the significance of a climate already having a mental emphasis out of which the statement on creativity was revised and reformulated. So that's what we're doing here. We're sort of qualifying what we're about to talk about by recognizing that there was a mental climate surrounding the revising and reformulation of the original statement on wisdom, because that derived from the magic structure. So that's very important. We just kind of have to get all this context out of the way first, so we don't misunderstand things, so we have a proper understanding of things how they are. We must also observe that the statement itself is older than the mental accentuation which Wen may have given it. Remember, Wen was the king. It is undoubtedly in this sense that a remark of Richard Wilhelm's should be understood. Quote, the creative causes the beginning and begetting of all beings, and can therefore be designated as heaven, radiant energy, father, ruler. It is a question whether the Chinese personify the creative, as the Greeks conceived it, in Zeus. The answer is that this problem is not the main one for the Chinese. The divine creative principle is supra-personal, supra, S-U-P-R-A, that means above, it is a-personal. Supra-personal and makes itself perceptible only through its all-powerful activity. It has, to be sure, an external aspect, which is heaven, and heaven, like all that lives, has a spiritual consciousness, God, the supreme ruler. But all this is summed up as the creative. So we can see how the original creative principle clearly has a connection to the spiritual other side. It's more than just, like he said, memory. How did he describe it? It's more than imaginary, intuitive, productive stuff, like this rational stuff. No, it derives from origin. It derives from a spiritual whole or force or energy, whatever you want to call it. We can use whatever word you want to describe, and that's why it's so powerful. So, interesting. It is this qualification that lends the full import to the Chinese statement on creativity. This import is underscored by the circumstance that the name for creativity and its character or image, like those of the remaining 7 primordial characters, quote, do not otherwise appear in the Chinese language, interesting, unquote, which further substantiates the great antiquity of this particular statement. This antiquity is in all likelihood further substantiated by the K sound of the word Qian, whose magic proclivity for expression was discussed in part 1. Remember, we talked about the expressions of the magic structure, even with the sounds of K. In the light of these preliminary remarks, we can assess the full significance of the Chinese statement in respect to its worth. Creativity is the, quote, primal power which is light-giving, active, strong, and of the spirit. It is constantly strong in character, and since it is without weakness, its essence is power or energy. Its image is heaven. Its energy is represented as unrestricted by any fixed conditions in space, and is therefore conceived of as motion. Time is regarded as the basis of this motion. Thus, the hexagram includes also the power of time and the power of persisting in time, that is, duration. For anyone who, quote, draws this oracle, it means that success will come to him from the primal depth of the universe, unquote. And the image which represents creativity, the double trigram of Qian, quote, of which heaven is the image, creates the idea of time, since it is, by its repetition, the same heaven moving with untiring power. There is also created the idea of duration both in and beyond time, a movement that never stops or slackens, just as one day follows another in an unending course. This duration in time is the image of the power inherent in the creative. So what the hell does that mean? So when he says talking about, let's see what he says exactly. The power of time and the power of persisting in time. So, of course, remember, time is an intensity. So this is the power of time. Time presents itself. It intensifies and brings with it anything to consciousness that is affected by creativity. This is the spiritual kind of creative inspiration, where the muses, if you watch The Value of Poetry and my Kill Rationalism, the muse brings up all of the sustenance of the life pole of the soul, or origin, and brings it to consciousness, which is effected by creativity, and then the poet is sort of compelled to write what he has seen in his own soul. Now, here's the thing about the creative principle and origin. So, creativity is essentially a current of energy that is just below the surface of intelligibility of humans. It is always present, always active. This is the duration that we're talking about. And origin, or creative moments, creative genius, creative powers, happens when that current of energy crystallizes into a moment or moments of creative inspiration. So, in one sense, it persists. It's both in and beyond time. What does that mean? Well, it's beyond time because it derives from origin, and origin is pre-time. It is pre-timelessness. So it is, quote unquote, above time. That's what he means when he says it is beyond time. It derives from origin, and origin precedes everything. It is the spiritual whole. It is everything. So it's beyond time in that sense. It is also in time because it is affected in the world that we live in. Obviously, when I do take this video, this is a creative project, and to a certain extent. This is happening in the world, right? This is happening. But that creative inspiration derived from a source that is not in this world, is atemporal. It is origin. So it's amaterial. It's beyond whatever we see here. So that's why it's in and beyond time. It is in time because creativity is obviously manifest and effected in this world in time, and it is beyond time because it derives from a spiritual whole or spiritual source that is above or beyond time, or even timelessness, or even pre-timelessness, whatever you can think of. So interesting stuff. But the key point here is that the true creativity, this, like I said, this stream of energy, this stream of force, this current of energy that is always active, kind of like origin, that's always there. And then origin crystallizes these streams into moments of creativity into the human individual or collective. So pretty interesting stuff. We're almost done, unfortunately. I know this is a shorter video. In his commentary, which is based, incidentally, on primordial and subsequently lost versions of the I Ching, Confucius writes, quote, "Great is the sublimity of the creative to which all beings owe their beginning and which permeates all heaven," unquote. But whatever pervades the heaven also pervades the soul. And for this reason alone, the pervasive, that is creativity, is of a spiritual nature. So that's what he's trying to get. That's the key point to this video. He's trying to get in your head that creativity is more than just the rational, willful ego. It is a originary phenomenon. It is a product of origin, the spiritual presence, the spiritual whole that works through us and then creates all of this. And that is why true creative acts, like I said, Mozart, Vivaldi, Bach, whoever you want to call it, Da Vinci, that's why it's timeless, because it derives from a timeless source. And yet, in many ways, it is affected in time, like I said. Because, well, they made, Da Vinci's Annunciation, that happened on Earth. I love you guys. You guys are the best. I apologize for the short video today. Again, new father, got a newborn. It's a little crazy. I'm a little tired, so I apologize. Hopefully this storage system, I can't imagine it'll be a problem in the future, so you guys should be getting more videos. And I should have a cool, fun video for you guys coming in the coming weeks. I know I've teased it, but I hope you guys enjoyed. I had a ton of fun making that video. So I love you guys. I will see you soon, and I'll see you next week. Thank you, guys.